Hey everyone, it's Marvin. Thanks so much for listening to Books and Boba. I just wanted to take a quick second to remind you that Books and Boba just launched our Patreon to help support our future endeavors. Rira and I have been running Books and Boba for the last 6.5 years, and we've always talked about wanting to do more, including expanding our content offerings, being able to go to book events and do more coverage. And so to help us get closer to those ambitions, we started a Patreon to help us grow and to better support books by Asian and Asian American authors. We are offering 2 tiers for our Patreon. The first is our regular Boba member coming in at $3 a month, which will give you access to our brand new Books and Boba Discord server so you can engage with your fellow Books and Boba Club members and also Rira and myself in real time. This is where we'll be aiming to move the bulk of our book club discussions, but rest assured we'll still have a presence on Goodreads as well. And our premium tier is our Honey Boba member tier coming in at $5 a month, where in addition to access to our Discord server, you'll also get access to our monthly Boba Chats, a bonus podcast where Rira and I and some guests will get together each month and have a more casual discussion on stuff that may or may not be book related, as well as answer some listener Q&A. Honey Boba members will also have access to a poll to help decide an official Books and Boba book pick once per quarter. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, support Books and Boba on Patreon by going to patreon.com/booksandboba. As always, Rira and I really appreciate your support. All right, thanks for listening, and I'm on with the show.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
Hey, you're listening to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here today for our book club discussion of our August 2021 book club pick, Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. Rira.
Yes.
Man, you weren't kidding when you were saying this is not a
this is not a light
lighter YA fare.
No, like I said, it dives into more heavy themes. It dives into President Duterte's war on drugs. It has, it has family death, grief, poverty, and there's like brief mentions of trafficking. So yeah, definitely not a light read. Go in with caution if any of those are your triggers.
Yeah, and I guess a quick content warning for our own discussion. We'll probably be touching on stuff like death and domestic violence too. So, yeah, just putting that out there. But yeah, let's. Should we get into it?
How did you want to get into it?
I feel like we just talked to each other like a couple of days ago, so I don't know if there's like banter. I mean, I do want to say that we did. Our timing got a little messed up, and I accidentally, because this was supposed to be our 150th episode.
Oh, really?
But then I accidentally put something else as 150. Our interview with Amanda Jayatissa, that one came out earlier this week. So this is 151. So we're going to celebrate. I guess we're celebrating the 150 plus 1 episode of Books and Boba.
Oh wow, it's been that many episodes.
How do you feel?
That's wild. I've never been this consistent at anything in my entire life. Yeah, it's wild. I worried about running out of content at some point, but the books just keep coming. The book deals and adaptations keep coming. So I'm like, okay, I guess we still have content. I guess we still have things to talk about. Great.
I mean, if anything, there's more books to talk about these days than ever before. Like we're getting pitched by publishers all the time, and we're only 2 people with 1 podcast, so we can't possibly cover every single book that comes across our desk. But we're trying our best, and this month also marks our 5th anniversary.
Yeah, 5th.
Yeah, man,
half a decade.
So thank you to all of our listeners who have been with us for the ride. And to those of you who have joined us recently, we hope you stick with us for the next 5 years as well. But yeah, I guess, man, 151 is, I feel like we, as in Rira and I, have done a not as good job celebrating our milestones.
Well, okay, here's the thing. Like, my personality is that I'm always moving the goalpost, like, even before, like, I reach a milestone. So it's like, it's really hard for me to celebrate stuff because I'm constantly thinking, like, oh, I should do better. Or I'm comparing myself to other podcasts. I'm like, these people have, like, what, like over 2,000 followers, and they have a Discord, they have all of these things, but our podcast is not up to that level. Mainly that's my fault because I'm not the one putting in the work to get us to that level.
No, it's I think we
are only two people. We do not have an intern.
Podcast. You would find our podcast at like your local Sprouts or Whole Foods, I guess. Are we a Whole Foods podcast? I don't know. Maybe your local farmers market.
Bad associations with Whole Foods, so I don't know about that comparison.
I mean, if we want to start a Discord, we can start a Discord. There's nothing stopping us.
Yeah, but then we have to start managing that Discord.
And to be fair, we have about 1,800 followers, so we're close to 2,000. So, time to move those goalposts again. Let's go for 5,000. Yeah. 5,000 followers.
But yeah, that's why we don't really celebrate milestones. In fact, I just completely forget about them until someone reminds me, and it's always been like this since my childhood. So there you have it.
Well, if our listeners feel so inclined, please shoot us a Twitter message or Instagram message congratulating us.
Yeah, validation's great.
It's kind of gauche to ask for validation, but this is for a good cause. It's to repair Rira's ego, so I think it's for a good cause.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that Marvin has to be the positive one out of two of us, it's it's a big responsibility.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, let's get into our discussion of Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. Rira, do you want to start us off with the book jacket description?
Yes. For those of you who do not care about spoilers, this is what the premise of the book is. So Jay Reguero plans to spend the last semester of his senior year playing video games before heading to the University of Michigan in the fall. But when he discovers that his Filipino cousin June was murdered as part of President Duterte's war on drugs, and no one in the family wants to talk about what happened, Jay travels to the Philippines to find out the real story. Hoping to uncover more about June and the events that led to his death, Jay is forced to reckon with the many sides of his cousin before he can face the whole horrible truth and the part he played in it. So Patron Saints of Nothing was a 2019 finalist for the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. So this was a highly celebrated book, and I could definitely see why.
I mean, okay, first of all, I know you mentioned it up top, but just to make it clear, this is all spoilers discussion. Spoiler safeties are off, so we'll be discussing main plot points, revelations, character secrets, and so if you haven't read the book yet and plan to, you should stop this podcast now and come back after you've finished so you can listen to our discussion. Or if you're one of those people who want to hear a spoiler discussion before you read the book, keep listening. No judgment here if that is what you want to do. But I feel like this book comes from a long line, and I know when it came out, it was being compared to The Hate You Give, right?
I don't know if it was compared, but it was definitely like in that category of like quote unquote issue books. I don't really like calling it issue books, but like I'm not sure when Randy started writing this, but it really felt like he started writing this like around 2016 because of like President Duterte, who came into power in 2016, the Trump election in 2016. There was a lot of grim, all of us were kind of doom scrolling at that time, and we still are. But, you know, it was like 2015 was all glitter and, oh, yeah, the Kardashians and reality TV shows. And then 2016 hit, and it was like, oh, damn. Like,
I mean, yeah, 2016 was when we realized that our world was still ruled by authoritarians, and for some reason, fascism was coming back. And so everything was not glittering and gold.
Yeah, so it dives into a lot of politics, but it's told from this perspective of one teenager and his cousin's death and like the grief that his family goes through. So it is very much humanized in a way where young people can relate to something that is, you know, highly political and really violent.
Yeah. So I guess to start off, what were your general thoughts about the book?
I really liked the book. I really liked the fact that it focused on Jay and his relationship with his cousin. I definitely related to having blood relatives that I used to be really close to when I was younger. And because you're an ocean away, those ties become frayed and you don't really know how to connect anymore. And so I definitely understand that, I guess, displacement when you come back to the motherland and you're like, we're family, but this is real awkward. And like I knew like the highlights, like the headlines of the war on drugs in the Philippines, but it was always written by American journalists, Western journalists. So I like the fact that Randy brought up like how that can be biased and like doesn't show the entire story. So yeah, like we're gonna talk a little bit more about like second generation guilt and like what it means to be part of the Asian diaspora and have opinions about the motherland and how like how we're conflicted because our family tells us we're not entitled to hold an opinion because we haven't grown up in that country. And are they right about that? What about you, Marvin? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I enjoyed the book as well. I like that we followed Jay's story of grief. Like this book is about this kid's journey of coming to accept his cousin's death and his own guilt of not being there as a second generation person who left the country. And I like that Randy was able to tell the story of grief using the backdrop of Duterte's war on drugs, which it's not that it's done for flavor, but it really complicates things, right? Like it's bad enough to leave a cousin or a loved one in their time of need. It's worse when it's like when there's external factors that would exacerbate that. And I think much like the character of Jay learned a lot about his country and what's going on there, the readers also learn about like these are all real events that Randy describes. And I'm sure like I don't want to say 90, like probably like maybe 60%, maybe that's being too generous, 70% of readers were not aware that these are real things that are happening until maybe they Googled it themselves, right?
Yeah, like Randy at the very end of the book lists a couple of sources that he used to research, and there were a lot of articles in there.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, you can read as many articles as you like, but you're not living there. You're not actually there in the place of action. So you could never really understand what the people who are going through in the war of drugs are.
Yeah. And I know that you mentioned that Uncle Manning, Tito Manning, says that, you shouldn't believe everything that Western media says. But there's also, there are a couple supplementary pieces that if people are interested in learning more about what's going on there should check out. One of them is called 1,000 Cuts. It's a documentary by Ramona Diaz that follows the journalists in the Philippines that are reporting on Duterte's war on drugs that are actively being silenced and threatened. Because one of the things that Duterte does, or his administration does, is they have a huge propaganda machine, which is a big reason why like people like Tila Manning and people in the country support the war on drugs and discredit like Western reporting as like slander.
Yeah, when I said like, oh, I like don't know the entire story because I've only read headlines and like articles by Western journalists who cover the war on drugs in the Philippines. I mean, like, I know that it is a problem. I know that Philippines, like, they have a propaganda machine and a lot of journalists are being silenced, are being killed. But like I said, like I'm not living in the Philippines, so therefore I can't fully understand the magnitude and the daily impact the war on drugs has on like everyday citizens over there. But that's pretty much what I mean. I don't want to sound like a really ignorant person right now.
No, I mean, one of the themes of the book is Jay coming to terms with his own, like, how much he didn't pay attention. And, you know, these issues become something that is really, really important to him because it affects people that he loves. It affects his family that he reconnects with during his journey. And I think part of one of the things that you can take from this book is maybe Americans can be a little bit more aware of international relations. That's kind of always been our one of our flaws is we believe America is the center of the universe, so we don't need to know about other places until stuff like this happens, and then people suddenly become experts on foreign relations, like. And
then we don't like credit America for instigating a lot of the problems that the country is going through.
Yeah, and I guess we should talk about Jay as the central character. He is the first-person narrator that we follow, and he is essentially, I mean, this story, Patron States of Nothing, is his coming-of-age story, right? It's a, if you take away all the current events trappings, this is a back to the motherland story, right? That we've read before, but instead of going back to the motherland to reconnect with their roots, or because they're forced to go to like a summer camp, he is going to investigate his cousin's death. So there's also hints of like a mystery in there too.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that his parents didn't want him to go back to the Philippines, so he came up with the excuse of, oh, I want to like retouch on like my roots and learn Tagalog and get close to my cousins again. And that's essentially what happens in his trip. It's
these parents obviously don't talk or know, like, I mean, even if they don't talk to their child, like, how could they believe that? Like, oh, like a week after my cousin dies, I'm gonna go to the Philippines to visit my family.
Okay, but the thing is, like, I think they knew what was up, but they were like, okay, well, he needs to go through this. Obviously, he's not going to quit. So, yeah, like,
I mean, let's talk about the family because it's interesting to me because Filipino families in fiction that I've read or seen on TV have always been like warm, close-knit families. And this was probably the first Filipino family that I've seen in media that is kind of similar to like what I would imagine like an East Asian family in media is, which is more cold and practical and bad at communicating.
Yeah, bad at communicating, definitely. I mean, silence is a big theme in this book, like not being able to talk to your family about very important things and how that strains the relationship, silence of journalism, and just like how you have to have really uncomfortable conversations in order to, reinforce those relationships that you have with your family.
Yeah.
Like the family dynamics, like I kind of understood the loneliness that Jay had of just like, oh, this is my family, but we don't talk about anything.
Yeah.
And like, are we really family because we don't really know each other?
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're the only ones in their family in the States, right? The rest of their family stayed in the Philippines. And there's a strained relationship between his father and the rest of his family as well. And this is a strain that is more familiar to me as like a child of immigrants from Taiwan, because my family was split up during the Chinese Civil War, and we've managed to reconnect with some of them, but they do hold some resentment towards my family for being able to like get out and live in the States.
Yeah, like I understood too, because like out of my extended family, my immediate family was the only one living in the States for a very, very long time. I would say like 16, 17 years. We were by ourselves, and we would go back to Korea to reconnect with the rest of the family. And I would just, my cousins were never mean to me or anything, but there would just be comments about my Americanness that just kind of seemed like it seemed insulting. But like I know it came from a place of just like not knowing the culture.
It's like that scene where Jay's aunt is showing him around her giant mansion, is making all these like, oh, we didn't have to leave the Philippines to like find success, and like Jay knows she's talking about him, but at that point he couldn't say anything about it, right? Because ultimately he is still Asian, and he still needs to respect his elders.
Yeah, I mean, like one comment that I would hear like regularly was just like, "Oh, it's so nice that you can speak English without an accent." And to me, I was like, "Well, that's because I was raised in America. That's not anything special." And then they would just like comment being like, "Oh, they'll compliment me on my English," and then for Korean, they're like, "Oh, it's good for like someone who lived in America for pretty much their entire life." And I was like, that's a very backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
I mean, Jay doesn't really go through that. He doesn't go through that exactly, because most of his family, they do speak English, or at least conversational English.
Like all that shade that his uncle throws at him.
I'm saying that it's not exactly the same, but yeah, definitely a lot of shaming for not knowing your mother tongue when it's like, I grew up in a different country. Yeah. Like that's not like the main language. And also Jay has the added layer of being mixed race. His mom is a white, quote unquote, white American. So he's definitely going through this, like this. He didn't go to the Philippines to do some soul searching on his identity, but that's pretty much what happened. And this idea of like not being Filipino enough, that has like an extra layer because he is mixed race.
Yeah. And the fact that he lives in Michigan, right? Not Ann Arbor, but like somewhere in Michigan, like some suburb or something.
Yeah, like he lives in that area.
Yeah. And I guess he's like not the only person of color, but probably one of the only Filipinos in Michigan, right? I don't think the book actually was explicit in the makeup of his school.
It sounded like it was mostly white, but also at the same time there were like people of color at his school. Probably not a high Filipino population, but it's like, okay, there are black folks, there are like East Asian folks and Hispanic folks. It's just like everything is kind of like evened out in like the diverse part of the school.
And he has one best friend who is just this like, I don't know if that friendship has any legs past college, but so he's already kind of lost, right? Like he has no connection to his family. His siblings don't get him. His parents don't get him. His friends don't even get him, right? And there's no one he can talk to. Like when he receives the news that his cousin June passed away, like there's literally no one he can talk to about it. And he goes searching for any traces of his cousin he has left, which is these letters that they used to write to each other that he kind of ended up ghosting June, right? And that's the beginning of his guilt. Like learning that he died as a part of Duterte's war on drugs and wondering like if there was anything he could have done to help, right? Because as we learn through Jay's investigation, June also was experiencing heavy alienation from his family and his community, right? Because this is the biggest plot point I think that like everything hinges on, or everything is kind of connected to, is his dad's a cop. And his dad is like top cop of his region, right?
Yeah, like the second I read that like Tito Manning was a cop, I was like, oh, he's a bad person. I already I already had my
Tito Manning is that one
much.
like Republican uncle that no one likes to talk to because they just start spouting like conservative, horrible like rhetoric. Like he's totally bought into Duterte's. I mean, I don't know if I believe that he's totally bought in. I think I don't know. Part of me thinks that Tito Manning has to say what he says because he's being monitored. Probably.
Perhaps. I feel like he has like bought into it for the most part, but I guess like because it's his family, he's like, well, you know, I'll make some exceptions here and there, I guess. It kind of reminds me of like when my dad voted for Trump.
Oh, no.
And, you know, like we like, and, you know, like I had that conversation of just like, well, like he has said some really disgusting things about women and, you know, like not to pull the whole you have a daughter card, but I will pull that out. Like if he said that about me, like, would you still vote for him? And he said, no, I wouldn't vote for him. But then he still voted for him. So it's just kind of like you have, like, you know what's right and you know what's wrong, but you're still willing to overlook that for the greater good. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but like that's kind of the feeling I got from
I mean, we don't
Tito
get
Manning.
any insight into his interiority except that, you know, there's the fact that he did know that his daughter was carrying on June's legacy in posting that anti-Duterte website and was kind of turning a blind eye to it. So...
yeah, because it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to arrest your daughter and like have her possibly be murdered? Like, of course not.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if he's like, you know, I don't know. I don't buy that he's 100% a dirtbag, but he's definitely part of the system. He might just be like, oh, if it only doesn't matter if it's my family, I will use my power to protect my family, but I will also use my power to crack down on all these, you know, drug users.
Okay, like it just goes to show that like there's a quote in the book that says none of us are just one thing, and it applies to pretty much every single character in this book, but especially Tito Manning, because throughout like 90% of the book you're like, this guy is awful, he's misogynistic, he tries to control his children, he kicked his son out. Like there are just like so many things that is just like so infuriating about him. But like towards like the last 10% of the book, you're like, okay, he's human. And even though even though he said otherwise and he like cut off his son, like he still cared about his son in the very end. It just came out in a way where it wasn't visible to everybody else. So it just shows that like there's complexity to Tito Manning despite his
he's just a toxic male figure that's misogynist.
He's just a typical like Asian patriarchal man who, you know, wants to be like the head of the household, and you know, it's just like, but no.
And it's like in opposition to like his family, who is like this mixed family, right? They have like multiple queer family members.
Yeah, but he doesn't get along
the thing is,
with
he
those
got
queer
along with
family
them
members.
until
That's the thing.
they decided to take in his son, right?
I don't know. It just felt like he was not in good terms with them anyway, and that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. That's kind of the feeling that I got.
He's that Republican uncle that no one likes to talk to because no one wants to deal with that shit.
It just made me wonder, like, if he knew that his daughter Grace was gay, it's like, what would that reaction be like? Probably not good. But would he disown his child over that? I'm not sure.
I mean, he still has one more.
Like, I'm leaning more towards.
So you never know, right?
Oh God, that's terrible, Marvin.
I'm just, based on my analysis of what he would do, he probably would disown her, or at least like give her an ultimatum And like Grace being the stronger person that she is will probably be like June and say, yeah, fuck it, I'm out. You know? She just needs to hang out for 3 more years and then she's out anyways, right? Technically, I don't know how Filipino college works.
I thought it was really interesting that Tito Manning was like, colonization is super bad. Did they teach you in America like how America is bad, and they like they were the ones who instigated the war on drugs, and how, you know, they took over our country after Spain left and the Philippines was like, we're independent, and America said, hold on a second, maybe not yet. And it was just like really funny to me because, like, yes, colonization is bad, but like the system that he is upholding now came from colonization.
It's like that old, I don't know if it's old saying, but like, he may be a dictator, but he's our dictator, right?
Oh, God.
I actually found it interesting that Jay didn't know anything about all that stuff. But then at the same time, he doesn't have like a community of people drilling that into his head. So I guess that makes sense. If he had gone to college and joined like a local like Filipino cultural org, he probably would learn about that stuff. But he got a crash course from his, you know, his fascist uncle, which is cool, you know? But you bring up a good point in that Tito Manning is saying that like a lot of the problems that the Philippines have endured over the years, and you see this. I think you kind of see this also with Korea, right? Like this like long-seated trauma of like we haven't been in control of our own destiny for so long, and like a lot of our problems come from like other countries like treating us as their thing, right?
Yeah.
And the book doesn't offer any solutions, right? It's not a book about like here's how we solve the war on drugs, right? It's focused on Jay's personal journey, and he does resolve to go back to the Philippines to, you know, learn more and to be more in touch with his roots. And probably, I don't know, I think the book alludes that he wants to help Mia with her project and, you know, maybe go down the path of being like an investigative journalist. Well, let's talk about Jay's family, because we have to meet a bunch of his cousins, his aunts and uncles, and they all seem to be pretty cool people. Like everything besides Tito Manning and his wife, they seem to be at least have more of a balanced view on Duterte's war on drugs.
Yeah, it's a very interesting family dynamic, I would say, because, you know, like they're Catholic, and also like half of their family is conservative, but then you also have gay aunts, and you have like you have a mixed family in there as well. 2 mixed families, because Tita Chato is a mixed race Chinese Filipina. So yeah,
to be fair, I think a lot of Filipinos in the Philippines are mixed race because of said colonialism.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it seemed like you said, like that family has a very like a more balanced view than a lot of other Filipino families would have. But like the strain and like the inner feuds and just family members not talking to each other and being like super passive aggressive, like, yeah, that's just I don't want to say like that's every Asian family, but it definitely feels like a lot of Asian Americans can relate to this.
See, this is where, like, because my family we're pretty close, and I'm pretty close with my cousins on my dad's side, but I am estranged from my cousins on my mom's side, and I have 2 there that I haven't talked to in probably over maybe 2 decades now.
But does your family have like taboo subjects? Like, I know for a lot of families who, you know, who were refugees, for example, like they don't talk about like the war that they fled. They don't talk about their trauma. And like for my family too, there are aspects where we just don't talk about stuff. And You just don't know about it until someone slips up. And with Jay's family, the taboo subject is June and why he was kicked out of the family and his death. And because it's assumed that he was a drug pusher and a drug addict, there's no memorial for him. And people are, there's like kind of this whole silent conversation saying like, we don't talk, like, we're not talking about this. This is going to bring up a can of worms. And there are people who are on opposing sides to this, but in order to maintain the peace,
essentially the reason they don't talk about it is we don't want Tito Manning to like blow a gasket.
Yeah, and like Jay's dad even like says, hey, when you go to the Philippines, don't bring up June at all. And it's like, how can you expect your son to not bring that up? Like, how, like you have a gruesome death in the family. Like, how can you not?
The whole reason he's going, like, one of the main reasons he's going is to confront Tito Manning about June's death and, like, whether or not he had a role in it, right? Because he got, like, I think most people would do after learning about the reason of June's death, he went on a Google bender and learned all about Duterte's war on drugs from Western reporting, looking at pictures, and he gets sent a anonymous Instagram message that says June's death was not like, he was innocent, right? He didn't do anything wrong, which leads him to believe that
his death was straight up was a cover up made by the police.
And he does he goes snooping in his uncle's office and finds like a piece of paper, like a list of drug dealers with his cousin's name on it. That's in Tito Manning's possession. So he knows that Tito Manning knew about June being on the list and either ordered it or did nothing.
Tito Manning didn't do, did nothing.
A big part of the story is Jay building up the courage to confront Tito Manning about it. And one of our book club members, Nina, commented on Goodreads saying, the one thing that I resonated with that was incredibly unexpected was Jay's inability to speak up to Tito Manning at the very beginning of his trip to the Philippines. Being unable to speak up and say what's on your mind after seeing the look on an elder's face is something that I deeply relate to.
And she goes on to say, I had to overcome this into adulthood and found it admirable, albeit unrealistic, when Jay finally confronted Tito Manning. Yes. Speaking, talking back to your elders is a big no-no in every Asian culture. And yeah, you don't really get that courage or that perspective because you're trained from a very young age. Like, the elders are always right. Like, you, don't question it. Or at least, don't rebel in front of their face. Do it behind their back. Like Grace does with her secret phone and her relationship with her girlfriend. And yeah, I don't know if it was unrealistic because the situation that Jay was in was so extreme. Like, finding out that your cousin was, murdered for being a drug pusher and your uncle being a cop and somehow being implicit in it. Yeah, that's not a normal situation.
I feel like it's similar to, and this is for anyone who's ever worked an office job, fantasizing about chewing out your boss and quitting on the spot, right? Everyone's had those fantasies when you've had a bad day at work, but you never really do it. And a lot of the first half of this book is Jay having the resolve and say, I'm going to do it this time, and then wussing out the last minute, right? And I thought it was really that was realistic because every scene, and Goodreads, our book club member Julie mentions this as well. Every scene with Tito Manning in it is super tense. He is a very imposing figure off the page, and it must have been terrifying to even be in that man's presence, right? Because it feels like he's on a hair trigger, right? He's he could attack you at any moment and seriously hurt you, which he does at the very end. The last confrontation, he almost chokes out his nephew.
Yeah, like I said, very extreme situation, and also Jay is on a time crunch because he's he's there for spring break. So there's this question of like, when is he ever going to find when is he ever going to have the opportunity to find out the truth, if not now? So I feel like that was like a very big contributing factor to him speaking up. But it does take like 90% of the book for him to get to that point. Well, I mean, the first
confrontation comes really like a lot earlier than I thought.
Yeah, but was it a confrontation? I don't know if it was a confrontation.
I mean, so the first time he confronts him is in the museum, right? And I think the biggest issue there is he worked up the courage, but he didn't have the live ammo, right? He didn't have enough connection or knowledge of what June was doing, who June was, what he did afterwards. All he had was like this piece of paper that shows that his uncle knew something. And I think you can see it as an allegory of like American righteous indignation of like learning one thing and assuming the worst about like a person, like, you know, based on his Western morals or whatever, right? Like he honestly thought that this was enough to get his uncle to repent, and it's not.
Yeah, and like, you know, his uncle says like, "What do you know? Like you did not grow up here. You don't know anything about like the history of this place. Like you don't know the complexities of the war on drugs. Like how dare you, young man? Like you think that this is enough to say that you know the entire scope of the problem of a country that I've lived in for my entire life, whereas like you, an American, like have been an ocean away and it has been so far removed from this conflict."
And even then, he's not saying what he wants to say, right? Like it takes until that last confrontation where like Tina Manning attacks him, because he literally says, "You kill your son."
Oof. That was not pretty. But like Tito Manning and just like a lot of situations that Jay faces, there's a question mark to it. It's like, are you Filipino enough to go search for these answers? Like, and you know, like I said, Jay is mixed race as well, so there's an added layer to it. And I feel like that is something that a lot of Asian diasporans go through, of like like with Hong Kong, for example. It's like, do you have the right to talk about it when you're like not actually there protesting? And it's like, and my answer to that is yes. You're like, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Just do your research and be like there are parts in this book where Jay realizes that he needs to just shut up and listen. There's a scene where him and Mia, who is a girl that is a friend of Grace, and she's an aspiring investigative journalist.
And I guess a potential romantic partner.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. But, you know, they go into the slums, which is where June was last seen, and they interview this woman, Reina, who he was living with, who is a victim of trafficking and a victim of domestic abuse. Not from June, by the way. But, like, there's a moment where Reina says, well, you know, this happened because men are going to be men, in sort of like that. In sort of like a joking way, but not really joking. And Jay is about to say, "Oh, not all men," and Mia's like, "Shut up, sit down. Don't make this about you, because it is not about you." And yeah, like this book also like dives into privilege of just like not being a man in a patriarchal society, but also, you know, being American and being separated from poverty, having like an entire house to yourself instead of living in the slums in like very haphazard housing, and just not worrying about like surviving. But at the same time, when he goes to the slums, he realizes that people are still living. Like, it's not just they're not entirely miserable all the time. Like, people adapt and try to make the best out of things. But yeah, shut up and listen is definitely a theme in this book.
Yeah, and ultimately, this story is a coming of age story for Jay, right? He starts out in a place of ignorance and self-centeredness, and then he goes to the Philippines and meets a lot of people doing things that they believe in, right? And that's something that he's never had as like a disaffected, like suburban kid growing up in Middle America.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting where like he would compare himself to June, being like, we're like pretty much the same age, but you know, I was worrying about math homework while he was worrying about the country spiraling because of drug problems and corruption, and him trying to survive by getting like groceries in like the slums. And it's just like, yeah, totally different problems, but you're the same age.
So we mentioned that there were two big confrontations with Tito Manning. The first happens in the museum when all he has is like that piece of paper proving that Tito Manning knew something. And the second one happens after he goes investigating with Mia, his not girlfriend, partner. He finds out that June runs this anti-government website, that he was, you know, kind of being essentially like a freedom fighter. He was living with his girlfriend and kind of taking care of her, Reina, who is the human trafficking victim, and essentially like leaves one day and ends up dead. And then so, you know, he takes those learnings and then confronts Tito Manning again, gets the shit beat out of him, but also is told to go talk to his last uncle, another uncle of his that is a priest that June also had contact with. And he learns that it's true that June ended up being addicted on drugs and may or may not have been selling it, right? And then, so, I mean, his goal in coming to the Philippines has always been to vindicate his cousin. And then at the very end, he's confronted with the fatal flaw. And I kind of, like, I was a little frustrated with Jay at this point, where his resolve falters because his cousin turned out not to be like the saint that he thought he was.
Yeah.
You know?
Catherine, one of our Goodreads member, wrote, whether or not June was using or selling drugs, it doesn't matter. He is still a person who loved and was loved. He was more than this thing that Jay was focusing on to determine the morals of June's character. And yeah, I agree with that. Like whether like June turning out to be a drug pusher doesn't cancel out the good that he's done with the website. And it just shows that people are complex and make mistakes. And also you shouldn't put people on a pedestal.
Well, it's also so frustrating that like he read all these articles, he learned about the drug war and how people were being killed for like minor infractions, right? Like, he learns that June was kicked out of his home for marijuana, which in the States would be like a whatever thing.
Yeah, like Seth
right?
smokes pot all the time. And yeah, it's like not a big deal.
And like in fact, like him being on the streets probably led to him doing more serious things than if he just stayed at home smoking pot. And it was really frustrating when Jay thought that, I guess he deserved to die then because he ended up being a drug user and maybe a drug pusher. And I liked that Grace was there to like slap him out of it. But
I think having the focus of the story being like Jay trying to find out the truth and, learning more about the situation in the country, like, I thought it was a good way to like humanize a very complex political problem. It's like June was a victim of the war on drugs, but he was still someone that was very important to a lot of people. And he wasn't just a number. And it really puts, I guess, when we look at statistics and when we look at photos, we get desensitized because so many horrible things happen in our lives. And, the way we cope with it is to just kind of lump everything together into numbers. So it was nice that this story, like the war on drugs is a backdrop, but it mainly focused on like the human aspects of grief and whatnot.
And what this one person, even though he was a drug dealer, like they didn't deserve to die on the street. They didn't deserve to be extrajudiciously killed, right? And I think that's what frustrated me was at that point, and this is like my reading of it, is proving his uncle wrong was more important than finding the truth. And it took like Grace to show him that no, like this is all part of June. So if we're going to celebrate his life, we have to accept even the bad parts of him. And the fact that like even if he was who the cop said he was, like still like he didn't deserve to die in the street.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Like I was reminded of like the scene where he's at the beach with his aunts, and you know, he's just thinking how, you know, like accepting that he's Filipino, like it means that he has to accept the good with the bad, like the tropical beaches and like the friendly nature of like Filipinos. Like that's all great and, you know, nice. It's, you know, a tourist fantasy, but he also has to accept the poverty and the corruption, and, you know, calling himself Filipino means accepting all of that. And that's the same thing with June's death. Like, you know, you have to accept all of him and all of the truth in order to really like know who he was and accept his death. Yeah, I thought it was like a very poignant theme in the book.
So in the end, he goes home, a changed man, and tells his dad that he wants to take a gap year to go back to the Philippines. And his dad's like, "Who is she?" Right?
Yeah, with Mia, I really didn't like the fact that they were kind of cheating, but not
I
really.
thought her boyfriend would be revealed to be June for some reason. Like I thought that was what they were leading up to. It was dispelled like pretty quickly, but at first that was my assumption, trying to like guess the twists of the mystery part of this novel.
Yeah, and I also just, I mean, Mia was an important character because like she's the one who's like moving the investigation along because Jay doesn't have the skills to investigate. But like, I don't know, she just kind of fell off the pages after a while. And I know like that was because Jay was visiting other family members. So I kind of wish she was used more in the story. And I also just kind of felt like there's a scene where Jay tells Mia that he stopped contacting June because he found a girlfriend. And that was one of the main reasons why they kind of fell off the routine of sending letters. And I was like, I kind of wish there wasn't a exact reason for him to stop sending letters, because that's just what happens. Like, people just lose touch because you're not in the same town or whatever.
I mean, to be fair, when you have your first girlfriend, you tend to go all in because it's your first. So I think it's a believable reason.
I guess I just wish that reason was left out in a way. I don't know if the romance elements in this book were necessary.
I mean, it was some good flavor. I guess the fact that they were technically, I mean, they didn't kiss or anything. They didn't do anything. I guess, did you call this emotional
Yeah, I
cheating?
would guess, yeah. It's like that really gray area.
But they're also both young, so, you know, maybe, I mean, he's obviously attracted to her ambition and drive, and she's probably attracted to his, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, why is she attracted to him? That was like a thing that I was wondering.
He's like a sad puppy, you know? He's just like
It's not a good enough reason, Marvin.
someone she can take care of.
I mean, I liked Mia because she really opens Jay's eyes to like his Americanness and just like him be like, oh, there's due process. This is like a human rights violation. And it's like, okay, Mr. American, like go sit down in the corner because due process here. Yeah, like it's a piece of paper. And, you know, you don't have the right to tell us that, you know better when you don't have to worry about your safety every single day. And, you know, that is a privilege. I feel like a lot of us forget that like as bad as things are in America in terms of like our judicial system, there are laws in place. There are measures in place that do protect us in ways that other people in other countries don't have. And we forget about that. And I guess like I appreciated Mia being there to like point out to Jay, like, hey, check your privilege, because, you know, we don't have that stuff here.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts on Patron Saints of Nothing?
I mean, we're limited on time, so obviously we didn't go into everything that we wanted to get into. But I think the book did a really good job covering a lot of topics. You know, not just grief and, you know, the conflict between Asian nationals versus Asian diasporans, finding out the truth and realizing that it's not what you expected, and it covers a lot for a pretty decently paced book. And just judging from our Goodreads comments, it seems that a lot of people are in agreement, like they like the book overall and the topics that it covered. So overall, it is a thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading it too. You know, it wasn't a lot of fun per se, but it was a good experience. You know, you can really feel Jay's grief and guilt the entire book, which can get a little oppressive if you're not up for that. But yeah, like Mira said, it's not an overly long book, and it moves at a pretty brisk pace. And as a coming of age story that has something to say, I think it really did its job well, right? Like he starts off lost, and I don't think he's found himself at the end, but he has a better idea of where he wants to go.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 18. So. Okay, this is like totally random, and it does not have to do with the heavy themes of this book, but I just thought it was really funny. There was a scene where he's doing karaoke with his aunts and like their neighbors, and they're like, oh, you have to sing. And the song that they picked for him was Call Me Maybe. Right. And I was just like, wow, like Call Me Maybe, what a throwback. And then Jay says that it was inescapable when he was in elementary school, and I was just like, wow, Call Me Maybe, like I was not that young when that song came out. I feel really old. But yeah, I thought it was like a pretty funny scene.
Yeah. I mean, we're both in our 30s now.
Yeah.
We can't self-insert into these YA novels anymore.
Well, we're not like the main demographics, but yeah. Like there are just like some parts where like, wow, I am so old. These kids are, you know, it's not instant messenger, but it's like through DMs on Instagram, which is pretty much the same thing as instant messenger. But I was just like, oh yeah, like kids have.
It was easier back in the day when it was just AIM. Like everyone was on AIM.
Yeah, everyone was on AIM. Now it's like you start conversations on Twitter DMs, and then you go into Instagram, and then you go into Line or whatever.
I have Line, WeChat, and WhatsApp in addition to Facebook Messenger. For a while, people were using Google Messenger. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's really funny how communication has changed because of technology, and it's funny that like June and Jay, they communicated via letters, and that's like something from our parents' time, you know, like even us, like we had email, so I don't know.
Yeah, we had email and we had like phone texting.
Yeah, we had phone texting, like without emojis,
not even like
or
the
anything.
QWERTY. Yeah, we didn't even have the QWERTY keyboard. We had to like type on the numpad.
Ah, the terrible days of
good old days. Kids these days don't even know. They don't
you guys
even know
are so lucky with.
They don't know what a payphone is. They don't know.
I didn't get like a phone until like freshman year of like high school, and it wasn't even like a real phone. By the time I went to college, I didn't have a smartphone, and I had to carry a map of New York City because I would get lost.
Smartphones didn't even exist until after I
it was
graduated
so
college,
expensive to get a smartphone when during our time as like teenagers and young adults. But we're not the demographics for this book. I was just saying that there were parts where I felt really old and out of touch.
No. I mean, these last 5 minutes have shown how much being reminded of our oldness will trigger us in the ways we did not expect. Thanks, Randy Ribay.
Here's the thing. What if we brought a younger person onto this podcast the next time we read a YA book? Maybe they can give us a more it's like, hey, is this accurate? Like, what do you kids do these days?
No, I think we should double down on having
cranky old people,
adult fans of YA on this podcast. We'll see.
But just judging from the comments, most people enjoyed reading this book, despite not being part of the main demographics. And it just shows that you shouldn't be prejudiced against young adult stories. There are still lessons to be learned, like coming of age. You can come of age at any age.
I mean, coming of age means different things to different people. All of us come of age differently. And some of us are still coming of age, even in our late 30s. So this podcast is coming of age in its 5th year.
I don't know. Sometimes I think about it and I'm like, I started this podcast in my mid-20s. This is so weird that I am past 30 now and we're still doing this podcast.
Not weird.
It's a milestone, I guess. I should celebrate my milestones.
On that note, I think that'll do it for our discussion of our August 2021 book club pick, Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. Let us know what you thought about the book on our Goodreads forums or on Twitter. You can find us on Books and Boba on most social media platforms. And we always love to hear what our listeners have to say about our book picks and about our podcast. With that, let's find out what book we're reading for September.
Oh, God, it's already September. That's so weird. But it's back to school season. So we are reading Chemistry by Wiki Wang. It is a very short novel. I would say around 200 pages or so. But it is about a Chinese-American PhD student who is at the cusp of having a seemingly perfect life with her longtime boyfriend proposing to her. But during the course of her PhD studies, she is unraveling with a lot of stress and just questions about what she's doing with her life. So kind of like a quarter life crisis in a way. And it's a very wry, quirky, dark humor kind of book. I read it back when it came out in 2017, and I'm really curious as to seeing how I feel about it now as someone who is past 30 years old. Because it is another coming of age story, but not really. It's an anti coming of age story in a weird way. But I'm excited to talk about it with Marvin. I know this book was on his to be read pile for a very long time. So
yeah, it's been on there for a long time. I actually have the book. It has a very striking cover, but I haven't opened it yet. So now it's a great excuse to break it open and read a physical book for once.
Yeah, we have a lot of we get books or we buy them and we're like, okay, we'll read this for Books and Boba at some point. So I guess we'll just save it until we read it. And it just took 3 or 4 years for us to finally read Chemistry for this podcast.
There are a lot of books by Asian and Asian Americans. So, not a bad problem to have.
That's true.
All right. Looking forward to reading that with you as well. And as always, if you finish the book early and want to talk about it, please leave us a post on our Goodreads forums. We always like to hear from you, and we'll also try to incorporate your feedback into our podcasts. But with that, thanks for listening to this edition of Books and Boba, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Ribay and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Life gets a little crazy sometimes. Sometimes it's confusing, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's beautiful, and sometimes it can just piss us off. Enter First of All Podcast. It's a safe space for real conversations about the things that we all struggle with, celebrate, contemplate, and work through in our daily lives. I'm your host, Mindy Chang. I'm an actor, filmmaker, and entrepreneur with a colorful background, a full life, and brilliant friends who I love to unpack life with to share with all of you. They are everyday people like you and me, ranging from award-winning artists, cultural icons, powerful CEOs, my hilarious childhood friends, and even my mom. Tune in for honest conversations on mental health, dating, sex, family, career, culture, and everything in between. Listen to First of All wherever you find podcasts, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.